If you've been watching my videos regularly here recently, you know that one of my fascinations is trying to explore the concept of exactly what constitutes as being biracial. Because how little of a certain other ethnic background do you have to be before you can still be considered that way? And what really brings this to light for me was watching The Racial Divide on Netflix. Because you had a woman who was not of African DNA but identified as black, but yet Black Americans said, you haven't experienced the black struggle, therefore you cannot identify as black. So I think that was interesting. So I was making videos kind of inspired by that. One of those videos was called, "To be a biracial American, what's the smallest percentage of another race you can be?" One of the comments, and this is a recurring comment that I get on this channel, and I acknowledge it as legitimate, but I just want to make sure that we talk about it. One of the comments on that video says this, quote, "You are starting from a wrong premise in biological terms. There are no races. There are genotypes and phenotypes, but no races. How do you categorize whites? Just pale people with blue eyes, with blonde hair, tan people with blue eyes, tan people with brown eyes, tan people with green eyes? What about tan people with brown eyes who have blonde and blue-eyed offspring?" Which is funny because that's my wife and I. We both have more of an olive complexion skin. We both have dark brown hair and we have brown eyes. Yet both of our children are blonde and have blue eyes and have a lighter tone of skin. So it's interesting. Of course, it's just DNA that didn't show up in us, but it's from our parents on both sides. So I just want to say that first part again. There are no races. There are genotypes and phenotypes, but no races. See, here's the thing. I believe that. I acknowledge that as truth. I acknowledge that as reality. But if everybody believed that, this channel wouldn't exist. I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers on this channel of people who don't believe what was just said in that comment. I think most people, despite that being the truth, what I just read, that ultimately race doesn't exist, but most people perceive that it exists anyway. And I think here in America especially, it's complicated because, again, inspired by watching the documentary The Racial Divide on Netflix, I realize how much the black struggle identifies as Black Americans and is a part of identity. So to take away that from Black Americans and to say, well, race doesn't exist, well, that's like taking part of their identity away. You know, and it's not just Black Americans, it's anyone. I mean, for me, I was always proud of having a mixed background. I don't know, being in Alabama, it was like you were either white or you were black. And then there were like a few Asian kids and a few Mexican kids growing up. Now that's all changed, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't as diverse then. So for me, growing up in that time, I thought it was cool that my grandma was a Mexican American first generation and that my grandfather was a first generation Italian. And then we learn now that it's only that much more complicated because he was actually Sephardic Jewish and Middle Eastern, tracing back to Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. Like, it's that much more diverse than I thought. So for me, I think it's more fascinating to pick apart where all over the globe my DNA comes from. I think, to me, that's more fascinating than anything. As far as race, you know, and I said in another video, I finally, as a 37-year-old man in 2018, realized that if, as an American, when I fill out forms, the way I feel most comfortable identifying is white Hispanic. That's how I identify. Because in theory, I've got the Mexican side, then I've got the Sephardic Jewish side, and DNA-wise, based on the results that I share in the trailer that I make for my channel here, ultimately it kind of comes down to, especially knowing my mom's DNA test, it really comes down to me being something like half Hispanic. But still, I'm perceived as a white man. So yeah, I agree. Race, it's imaginary. But it's like the movie The Skeleton Key. Have you seen that movie? I actually own that on DVD. Apparently that's one of my favorite scary movies. And each time I watch it, I still like it. But in that movie, the whole concept was the curse only existed if you believed in it. And you had to get people to believe that was the whole. But once you did, and they would believe the curse, then there you go. And I think it's the same thing with race. The fact that we continue to perceive that race exists, aside from just what was mentioned in the comment there, because when it really comes down to it, genotypes and phenotypes, that's really what this is all about. But as long as we perceive that race exists, it's going to continue to exist. As long as people are able to discriminate against one another because of that, race is still going to exist. And as long as a person can celebrate their race as part of their identity, to the point that if you take that away from them, you're taking their identity away, well, that's even worse too. So I think at this point in history, and especially in American culture, there's no way to deny that race exists. All we can really do is learn to acknowledge and celebrate it, which, believe it or not, that's one of the major motivations I have in this channel, is bringing us together despite our different backgrounds and finding out, you know what do we have in common? Not what do we disagree about? How are we different? I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in knowing, despite our differences, what do we have in common? What brings us together? What shared DNA do we have? What shared culture do we have? Race, it's real because we continue to believe it's real. Really, this is a channel about me celebrating, not race so much, but if anything, I'm celebrating perceptions of these collections of genotypes and phenotypes. But that doesn't interest anyone. People want to talk about race and ethnicity. So if that's the way we need to digest it, that's the way we're going to digest it. And in the meantime, I get to keep saying what's in my heart is that I love to celebrate what we have in common and to appreciate all the different backgrounds we come from, whether that's race or phenotypes or culture, whatever it is. What are your thoughts on that? There's a comment section waiting for you right here.